I'll get started. Okay. So for tonight's presentation, I like to start every presentation kind of just assuming my audience does not know a lot about the issue. So to get started, I'm just going to give kind of a brief overview video, and it's only about 4 minutes long.
Today, we are asking for abolition of the federal death penalty.
While we are in the midst of a national reckoning on racial injustice, abolishing the death penalty must be a part of that debate and that discourse, because this is a racial justice issue.
My name is Roderick Reed. I'm the brother of Rodney Reed in Encinitas, Texas death row. There's a great need for people to get involved and realize what's going on. These state-sanctioned murders, these federal-sanctioned murders, they're just that, they're murders.
When it comes to the death penalty, we stand alone among our peers, our peer nations around the world. And we're usually in the top 10, sometimes the top 5 of the most executions in the world.
Donald Trump has now executed 5 in the last couple of months. He's got one scheduled for today, and he's got one scheduled for Thursday. The death penalty's got to come to an end. It's got to come to an end now.
We got to make noise. We gotta be louder about this. Once people understand this is happening, they oppose it immediately. Some people think it just, was shelved in the past. Well, this administration is trying to take us back. We're not going to let them take us back. This is our country. The death penalty is inhumane, and we should not have it in these United States of America.
The death penalty only creates another grieving family, another victim, and furthers the cycle of violence. I believe that the best way to honor my brother Paul, who was murdered, is to work for the prevention of violence, not to replicate it.
The death penalty is not necessary. We know that we can be safe from dangerous offenders and hold them accountable without executions. It's what we do the vast majority of the time.
My son had 3 execution dates, and there were 3 dates where he was to be released. It is an emotional roller coaster no family should have to live through. We are all more than the worst thing we have ever done.
It is not easy to stand here before you and talk on these issues. While my brother is still on death row, we've been fighting for his life for almost 24 years, but it is a must that I do so. It is a must that we come together as a community and fight.
How we as a society treat those who are at the lowest level, the condemned, the guilty, that is the greatest reflection on who we are as human beings. So join us and please support this cause. There are real lives.
Okay. So that was kind of just to give you a little bit of a firsthand perspective on the issue that I'll be talking about. And then speaking of firsthand perspectives, you'll also see a lot of clips embedded in this presentation. And these clips are of an interview that I was able to have last month with Mr. Charles Keith. He's the brother of Kevin Keith, who is on death row and was just recently granted clemency and is serving a life sentence, and they're still trying to prove his innocence. So if you see the clips that are embedded in this presentation of a man talking, that's who it is. And if you can, some of them can be a little bit long. If you can, I would really try and pay attention because they're extremely eye-opening and extremely important. Okay, so again, just a brief overview with some statistics. So capital punishment is the punishing by death of crimes. This can range from really minor crimes like drug offenses to obviously very larger crimes like terrorism. In the United States, as I'm sure most of you know, this is usually for crimes involving murder. So as you guys know, the death penalty is taking over the nation. To try and remain a little bit optimistic, the number of states that have imposed their death penalty, it's slowly decreasing over time, which is a very good thing. The COVID-19 pandemic has actually made states kind of rethink their position on the death penalty. So that's decreased it by a couple numbers as well, which is obviously very good. However, it's nowhere where it needs to be today. The death penalty is used by 27 different states, and that is a very, very large number. In terms of federal capital punishment, as I'm sure you know again, federal capital punishment and state capital punishment is very different. Federal capital punishment is more extreme. It's more rare, but it is a lot more extreme. State capital punishment, the states can have their own say. The states really mandate whether or not someone is allowed to be executed or should be executed. And then they also get to control really if they want to have the death penalty continued in their state. Federal executions nationwide, a really important thing to remember is that the death penalty is arbitrary. The president can choose to hold an execution in really any state, which is why it's so much more grave, even in those that have forbidden the punishment. So the president can choose to hold an execution in a state that does not have the death penalty, which is obviously a very, very huge problem. Another really, really important thing to take note of is that the death penalty it's just incredibly unjust in the sense that over 4% of those executed are innocent. So many people on death row did not actually commit the crime that they are on death row for, or that they were tried for. And this 4% is only of those people that we know of. Imagine the number of people whose cases they just went uninvestigated. I think that's a really, really important thing to keep in mind as we go forward with this presentation. So to kind of give you more of a visual, these are the states, the oranges are the states that have the death penalty, as you can see. The gray states mean that the death penalty is on pause as of now. A lot of this, again, was because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the good thing to remain optimistic again is that the states that have the moratorium, a lot of them are saying that a lot of them seem to be leaning more towards abolishing their state death penalty, which is a very good thing. Something to keep in mind, Virginia just recently abolished their state death penalty. I just couldn't find an updated map. Okay.
We actually don't see a map, it's blank.
Oh, you can't see it?
Now we do.
There it is.
It wasn't there before, but it is now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, before I start getting into this, I'd really like to preface that systemic racism and racial discrimination is not by any means the only discrimination that lies within capital punishment. Similar to really just about any other system that we uphold in this nation, there is discrimination against foreign nationals, religious minorities, any type of mental illness. This system was built on white supremacy, similar to, again, really every other system that we uphold today. It's irrefutable that racism and discrimination of all forms lie within the system. However, this racial injustice, from what I've seen and from what I've learned, it is at its worst right now, and it is the most extreme, and that's why I'll be focusing on it today, and kind of putting my efforts into that. So again, it's irrefutable. A lot of people try to make the argument that capital punishment, there's no real discrimination in it. It's a narrative that the left is pushing. But this systemic racism is so evident in the capital punishment industrial complex. And statistically, it's been proven that the killers of white people are more likely to be put on death row than the killers of Black people. And cases with white victims are far more likely to be investigated. I'm not usually someone who likes to read off the slides, but these statistics are incredibly important. Approximately 61% of the US is white, but 55% of people on death row are people of color. And I have my sources at the end of this slide. It's really important to have the conversation of whether or not capital punishment in itself is right or wrong. However, the conversation goes so much further than that. This is a case of severe racial injustice. And again, here's Charles Keith. You'll be seeing a lot of him tonight. And this is just a part of the interview that I had with him where he speaks a little bit more about this specifically.
What I saw was racism at the court level, because you could have a racist judge, you're a racist prosecutor, but usually it comprised in the jury. You can't sit on a death penalty case if you're not for the death penalty. So you're actually sitting on a death penalty jury. You have to be for that. And then the person, you're more likely, if a Black person has killed a white person, to get the death penalty. And if that person is Black, you're more likely to get the death penalty than a white person killing a Black person would get the death penalty. So, you're looking at a lot of, and the juries are not made up of younger people. And that's something else that I had brought up. So, you're looking at genders, you're looking at people's biases and stuff. So, yeah, you're more than likely, my brother went against an all-white jury. The judge called him a snake in the grass. Prosecutor says he got what he deserved. I was like, wow, when you hear stuff like that come out of people's mouths, then you're not only fighting the law, now you're fighting their attitudes. So how do I combat their attitude when they're not going to listen to me and what I represent as a Black person? They're not even going to allow me to come anywhere near them to explain or ask questions. And that's where awareness and outside sources come in to help.
And so here's just another visual. As you can see, when the case that is at court, when it's a case where the victim is white, it is 100% more likely, it is so much more likely to be investigated and then be brought to the question of whether or not it should be on death row. If the victim should be, if the person being tried should be on death row, just to kind of give you more of a visual perspective. So similar to what Mr. Keith was also just talking about, this racial discrimination, it's not only kind of when you're looking at the statistics of how many people of color are actually executed, it comes a lot earlier than that. When the person being tried is actually standing at court, just like Mr. Keith was saying, that is when this racial discrimination is arguably at its worst and arguably most evident. As you guys know, this, and similar to what I was saying before, because the system was built on white supremacy, a lot of the people that go into law, including judges that are making these decisions of whether or not this person should go on death row or not, they don't like to acknowledge that there may be traces of systemic discrimination, systemic racism. Because they don't like to acknowledge this, and because really not many conversations are being had about this issue, then when it comes time to decide if the inmate is guilty and should face capital punishment, this discrimination is 100% influencing their decision. Just like Mr. Charles Keith was saying about his brother, when his brother was standing in front of the court, he was a man of color, and they believe that when he was standing in front of the court, it wasn't a matter of whether he was guilty or innocent, it was a matter of whether the judge liked him or not. And unfortunately, because this judge is going by a racist law, he was given the death penalty. And he fell victim to this racial discrimination. On top of this, you'll see this in the next clip I play. It's a sad reality that many of the people that fall victim to capital punishment are people of color, and people of color in this country are generally do not have equal access to the education that lawyers have, white lawyers have. So that when they come to court, they really don't know as much as one would hope. They don't really know, in most cases, they don't really know what is going on, how the legal system works. This in part is due to our overall state mandated education system that I will talk about a little bit later. But that's also a huge issue, and lawyers and judges know this, and they'll take advantage of this. And Mr. Keith is going to touch on that in this clip.
My brother was not high on education. He and I talked about that. He was a star football player, but he says, Chuck, I don't want to go to college. And I told him, I says, well, everybody doesn't go to college. If you don't feel college is for you, then don't go. But he never thought that would play against him in this trial. That was one of the things that they brought up. Hey, the guy was a star football player, and it's almost like he refused to go to college. And that played against it because they felt like, you made a bad decision. He wasn't college. He was football material. He wasn't college material. And all these things that he didn't do, to prepare for his future like he should, one day he ends up in court and all that stuff came on trial. And they judged him for that. And I feel today that it's not a matter of whether my brother was guilty or innocent. It was whether the jury liked him or not. And for what we were presenting and what he was presenting as far as likeness, they didn't like his lifestyle. Therefore, he was found guilty. He was put on death row. I had to learn so much about the law, so much. And, we went within 13 days of him being executed. This is the first case that the governor has gone against his parole board to grant clemency to a death row inmate. So this is historic. Right now, we're in the United States Supreme Court. This is the second case in the history of its court. I believe the second person that's ever had their case looked at 2 times. So we've been up there. This is our second time. I didn't know all this stuff. I'm giving you 28 years of what I've gone through. But in the beginning, I had the same looks like you guys have. What is going on here? What do you mean death penalty? How do you prepare a family? How do you prepare anybody for the death penalty? So you're sitting there like a movie you've never seen. The only way you can speak on that movie is once it's over. Now, you don't know if you like it or dislike it or anything until the movie's completely over, and then you get a chance to discuss it with other people. And that's what happened with our family with the death penalty. Nobody had a clue what was going on. We were victims to whatever it is that they wanted to do. And then we came back as a family and discussed it, and we didn't know what to say. We weren't highly educated. There were no teachers. There was no educators in our family. So it split our family. It made everybody feel guilty. And to this day, a lot of us still don't speak. And it's because of the death penalty. How do you fight death? How do you come in and you think you're going to get a fair shake? I'm rattled by it. Here I was, a college student, believing in the system, believing in fairness, believing in attorneys, both prosecutor, judge, lawyer. I had no idea that something like this would happen. And it scared me to death. It literally has. I've got so many scars inside my spirit. I used to cry every time I started talking about this stuff.
So the bottom line, the biggest thing that I would like you guys to take note of in this presentation, humans are fallible, meaning we make mistakes. No human is capable of never making mistakes. The risk of executing the innocent will never be eliminated. Why instill a punishment that carries this risk? That's the biggest question that we have to ask. This punishment is extremely unethical, extremely unjust, and it does not even statistically it's not statistically proven to even deter crime. Why do we even have it in place? It does not make any sense to me. And just asking these questions and always having these questions in the back of our minds as we go about life and as we kind of interact with these systems, it's so important to just keep that in mind. So now I will take questions for the first part of the presentation.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, we can you can type them in the chat and I can read them out, or you can use your raise hand feature and we can call on you to ask your question directly. Fiona will, okay, we have a question here from Brian.
Hey, thanks so much for the presentation. What are common arguments, for the death penalty that are challenging to overcome, or just what are some of the common pro death penalty rationale?
The biggest one that I've seen is kind of the religious side of the argument. A lot of people say, well, the Bible says an eye for an eye. The Bible says an eye for an eye, meaning that if someone murders, for example, if someone murders my brother, then that means he needs to be murdered too. To that I say, the Bible also says, thou shalt not kill. That's one of the 10 commandments. You'd think that that would take precedence. It seems as though it's difficult to speak on. It's very controversial. I myself am Catholic, but it seems as though the people that are using the Bible for this sort of justification are kind of picking and choosing which parts of the Bible they would like to follow.
Great, thanks for that question, Brian, and thank you, Fiona. Okay, if we don't have any other questions, we can carry on with the presentation.
Okay, just share my screen again. Okay, so the next part of my presentation is going to be kind of what we can do. I've spoken a little bit about what capital punishment really is. I've gone into the racial injustices, this type of discrimination. So now I'm going to move into kind of the different forms of advocacy and action plans that we can take to try and combat this capital punishment. Okay, so again, I'm going to start with another clip of Mr. Keith. The next clips I'm going to show you are kind of just general things to keep in the back of your mind about, in his perspective, some of the best advocacy forms.
You don't want to go totally in depth in a case because you usually get lost in it, but there's a lot of captions, there's a lot of work that people have already done. And what you do is spread the word, because there's somebody that doesn't know about this case. There's people out there that don't know about the death penalty. All they know is the word death penalty. And a lot of people have they think in their mind, well, they must have done something. Well, that doesn't mean you killed somebody because you must have done something. You can't put people on death row because you think they done something. So I think that awareness, one of the most powerful tools, word of mouth spreading, and then some action behind it, such as signing the petitions, the phone calls, all that action stuff. I mean, this is America, and this is what we do.
And again, going back to that question before, giving this presentation is also a little challenging because I myself, I've never had a loved one taken from me in this cruel way that would require, or that would, someone going on death row would be up for debate. My purpose in giving this presentation is just trying to amplify the voices of those who have fallen victim to it. Watching Mr. Keith's, just interviewing him, it was so incredibly eye-opening, and that's why I have embedded so many of these clips, getting this firsthand perspective of what it's really like to undergo or to just kind of interact with this system. It's so important.
what I had to do at one point, I went around to every Goodwill I could find. I mean, I was a madman, and I hunted down law books, and I read these law books so I could understand what they're talking about. I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. So now that I do, going to the computer, picking up pamphlets, seeing what other people have done, cross-referencing cases, and then I actually have befriended some judges and lawyers. So I called them. I call my mayor, and they're like, Charles, what do you want? He's my mayor. I just like to say hi. So I made myself visible to our own city government. This is my mayor. This is my prosecutor. This is my city government. My city council. These people represent me. And one of my problems was I didn't know what their functions or their jobs was. I pushed myself aside. So once I got involved, engaged in my own community, I realized that all this work that these people were doing were for me and other people in our society. Do you know how many people live in a city and have never gone into a mayor's office, never talked to a mayor, never ever, but yet you vote? So you have rights, and then you want to familiarize. You want to be friendly with your own system. This is your community. There's no way that a person or families can have lived in a community all their lives and never met a judge. Never met them. So what I did, I went down.
The biggest thing that we can do to take action, just in my opinion, from what I've researched, comes from education. Education is the key to any sort of social change. And not only is this about educating yourself, as Mr. Keith was saying, just trying to constantly stay involved with your congressmen, with your representatives, talking to them, and just always trying to stay up to date with news about the issue. Not only is it about educating yourself, but it's also trying to reform the education systems that we have in place today. I'm in 11th grade. I'm nearing the end of my junior year. And I can tell you, I've never spoken about capital punishment in my public education system. I haven't even really spoken about the law in general, let alone the death penalty. And this is a huge, huge pressing issue. It's a case of racial injustice. It's a case of domestic violence. It's arguably one of the biggest issues that our nation is facing today, but we're not taught about it. Our education system doesn't even mention it. So pushing to expand these statewide education systems to include talk about the law, talk about criminal justice, talk about the death penalty in itself, is very, very important. One way that I've done this that I think is the most accessible way to take action for everyone is just staying in touch with the Board of Education in your state. I know the Board of Education in Massachusetts, they're very willing to listen to you. And I'm sure it's the same for other states as well.
Yes, because not everybody goes into the court system, and we don't get a chance to know what our legal system is about. And that's what I told them. I had to learn the system, not be a lawyer. That's the lawyer's job, the judge, and that's their job. But I need to know, how do you guys interact? How does the judge affect the prosecutor, which affects the jury, which affects the defense, and then the defendant? How does all this work? So I found myself just sitting in court with my jaw dropped, not knowing what's going on. Terminology's flying all past me. I don't know what these words mean. And then, after the fact, and I started looking up some of those words and seeing what it was. Actually, all you're doing is playing games with the jury, because I know they're not scholars. So if I don't understand those words, I know they don't either. So yes, I think putting that into school, we have economics, with government, we have stuff like that, but nobody goes to say, okay, how does the courts function? I've seen students come in there, but to know how that stuff functions, then you can see when things go wrong. You can see, when you're reading cases, things that happen. You know, it just makes you so much more aware at that level, because once you get to college, you're usually going into your careers, and not everybody chooses law.
So the next thing I'll talk about, petitions and donations. I am assuming that this is kind of the action call that most people know about today. It's also the most accessible, especially in a time when so many of us are really not even allowed to leave the house, let alone go to marches and protests. Petitions and donations are a great way to start. Petitions and donations are extremely powerful. I know Death Penalty Action, which is the federal death penalty abolishment group that I've spoken to and I've worked with a little bit, a lot of their petitions have managed to delay people's executions. I think a couple of them have even managed to stop the execution in itself. So petitions are without a doubt very, very powerful, and so are donations. So if you have the chance, whenever you see a petition for the delay or the ending of someone's execution, without a doubt sign them. But the important thing to realize is that this is only the first step. A lot of people will sign the petitions, will donate, and then think that that's enough. And while it does do so much, it's really not. There's so much more that we can do, and there's so much more that we can do without too much difficulty.
Because these are the voters. Even the young people are potential voters. That's usually what young people call potential voters. And your politicians, your representatives, they see which way. There's a word called sway. You know, you sway this way. That's why you hear right wing, left wing, but it's still the same bird. You know, but it's how people are feeling. So when they're signing in these petitions, how are these people feeling? And say there's 50,000 people, but I only got 200 petitions. I'm still going to pay attention to that, because that's 200 people that's in my district. You know, I can't just throw that away. So the petition is like a way of getting their attention, saying, hey, hold on. We see what you're doing. Here's our subject matter. Can you and will you address this? And if not, then we may have to do other measures or may vote you out. And that's what petitions are all about.
So again, just talking about the real power behind the petitions.
Because
the next thing I'll talk about, I just want to preface that this bill that I'm about to start talking about, or that I'm about to kind of dive into, it just moved into old legislation. However, Ms. Presley has said that she plans on reintroducing the bill. So Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Presley, I'm not sure if you've heard of her, but the bill that she's been working on, which is called the Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act of 2021, the bill number is HR 4052. It has generated insane amounts of support and awareness. This bill is a bill really like no other. We haven't really seen a bill that has generated this much awareness about capital punishment, about this issue, which is why I included it in this presentation. It's so important to stand by her and give her your support while she tries to reintroduce this bill, tries to generate even more awareness, and finally trying to pass it. Not only because of this bill in itself, but because of what this bill represents. This bill represents a chance for social change that we really haven't seen before with this issue. So she's calling on the Biden administration, as it says, to prioritize abolishing the death penalty within all jurisdictions. This absolutely needs our attention, just like I was saying before. So if you get the chance, I believe Brian and Amar will send out these links. The interview that she has with WBUR, there's a lot of them out there that you can watch. There's so many websites that have areas for you to donate and sign up for her newsletters. And then just having active conversations about the bill is very important also. We've seen it kind of die down a little bit within these past few weeks. Making sure that this bill along with the issue in itself, stays in your conversation, stays in your daily lives. It's very, very important. And this is also very difficult to talk about when you're having these active conversations, not just about the bill, but about capital punishment in general. And even just issues like racial discrimination, things that play into the death penalty. It's so important to consider the other side of the argument. This is difficult for me to say because I'm someone that, when it's a matter of human rights, a lot of us don't want to consider the other side. This is a matter of human rights. It's hard to believe that people could really stand for this violence. But it's so important to try and have conversations with people who are in favor of the death penalty, reading articles by people who are in favor of the death penalty. By doing this, we're able to kind of understand where these people are coming from, and therefore we're able to better understand how to reach them. The people who are in favor of the death penalty and the people who are kind of blind to the detrimental pitfall behind capital punishment, these are the people who we must focus on the most. A great question to ask when you are having these conversations, or if you're someone who is in favor of the death penalty, just ask yourself, will it really make a huge difference in my life having this person executed rather than serving jail time, foregoing typical and just imprisonment? We've seen people who fall victim to capital punishment, their families undergo serious trauma. Is that really worth it? Again, it's difficult for me to speak on because I haven't really had to interact firsthand with this issue. But that is why I have been including so many clips of Mr. Keith. That's why I've been trying to have conversations, and I encourage you to do the same. And then the last thing is make presentations of your own. My presentation is certainly not perfect. I'm definitely being hit by some nerves. There's a lot of points that I probably missed. Just getting out there and doing something, it does so much. And it doesn't have to be a lot. I think you'll find that once you start kind of engaging more in the issue, even if it's another issue that you're really passionate about, you'll see that it's really not as difficult as you would think. The way I started was when I signed a petition for Dustin Higgs through Death Penalty Action's website. I received one of their newsletters, and then I emailed them again, and I asked if there was something more I could do besides signing petitions and donations, because that's really all I knew about. They got back to me really quickly, and I asked if we could organize a phone call, and then we did, and they helped me kind of go over some of the points that I was blind to. They helped me come up with like an initial presentation that I started giving to school clubs, and then it just started growing, and I was able to become so much more educated, and I was able to do so much more than I had ever thought. It really was so much easier than I would think, or than I did think. My point is, anyone can spread the word. Wherever you are, whatever you do, it's really not as difficult as you would think to make a change. Even if all you're able to do is sign petitions, or even if all you're able to do is kind of reading articles, that will do so much. And I really, really encourage you to just, even if it's not with death penalty, other human rights issues, just keep having conversations and just do something. It will do so much more than you know. And here's kind of a closing clip.
Such as myself, could be Death Penalty Action, some of the other people out there that's involved in this, that's where you get your information. That's where you get your knowledge, and that's where you started spreading it through your community, through your churches, through your schools, your congressmen. This is America, and these are your voices, and you have that opportunity to make a move to help end the death penalty in America.
All right, so I will stop sharing. Again, touching on racial injustice, just going back really quickly. I obviously am white, and I have extensive amounts of privilege in this society. And my point trying to talk about racial injustice was not to kind of push down other voices. I was just trying to amplify the voices of people of color that have fallen victim to this this really issue of domestic violence. And that is why, if you were able to pay attention to the clips that I have embedded, that's fabulous. But also, if you want the full interview, the link to the full interview that I had with Mr. Keith, I can 100% send it to you. You could just put it in the chat, or I believe you all have my email. But I would be happy to send that out to you also.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Fiona. That was I really enjoyed that presentation. I learned a lot of things. Like I didn't realize that the president can execute somebody even in states where they don't do the death penalty. So that was something new I learned. Yeah. So let's, after this, Fiona, I'll share with you the all the people who registered for this event, and you can email them the follow up with the Charles Keith interview and the Ayanna Pressley bill. So if people want to call their member of Congress to get them to support that bill, they'll know, they'll have that information. So we have a couple hands raised and we have a couple questions in the chat. So first, I'll pass the floor to Mass Peace Action member Luis to ask her question. Luis, can you please unmute yourself?
Okay. Yeah, I'm just really curious. I'm not sure about what the procedure is logistically for ending the death penalty. I mean, if there's the death penalty in states, but it's also a federal stipulation, what do you have to, how do you make it, how do you get rid of it? I mean, is it, I guess the question is it a state issue or a federal issue or both?
Yeah, I mean, it's both. In reality, they're two very different issues. So Massachusetts, as you guys know, there's no death penalty imposed in Massachusetts, but if you are someone who is living in a state where there is the death penalty, that's a matter of just trying to keep in contact with your representatives, your state representatives, trying to keep in touch with your congressman. So working on that while simultaneously prioritizing these bills that, like Mrs. Presley's, that are working to end federal capital punishment. By doing that, by making sure we raise awareness for those, that's how we'll really end it. Again, I'm 16 years old. I haven't been working on this for too long. I still have a lot to learn, but this is what I've been learning so far with the research that I've been doing and with the people that I've been talking about.
No, it's really helpful. It's really interesting. But I was just thinking about, like, with Zanara, when he was convicted in Massachusetts, which doesn't have the death penalty, but the federal people who tried him, they're the people who assigned the death penalty to him. Was that not the way it was? I think.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, it is arbitrary. So the president does have the power to be able to do this.
So in other words, we could work on a state level, but to really change it up, it has to, the federal legislation has to happen.
Yeah, that's why Ayanna Pressley's bill was such a big part of my presentation.
Great. Okay. Good. Well, thank you very much for doing this. It's great.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
No, it's okay.
Great, thanks, Luis. All right, we have a couple of questions in the chat as well, and I'll get to those. Let's take a question next from, I don't want to mispronounce your name. Is Vara, is that correct? Could you please unmute yourself? I think you're muted.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much. I wanted to congratulate Fiona for a well-articulated, eloquent, very informative, very well organized, clear, eye-opening presentation. Very educated me quite a bit. I have been on this theme for about 56 years, and it brought back lots of things that I had forgotten. Very intelligible, inspirational, and presenting excellent ideas. I really appreciate to see a young person working on this. And yes, I would love to have, as you said, your email to, I live in California, and maybe I have these groups and other people here that would love to get in touch with you also. Thank you.
Thank you
That's
so
all.
much.
That's a comment.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'll put my email in the chat.
Great, awesome. Thank you, Isvara, for that comment. And I think many of us share your sentiments here. All right, so next up, let me read a question from Kathy. Kathy is asking, Fiona, what is your peer group's response to your involvement in fighting the death penalty? What is their response to your fighting against racism?
Yeah, so many of the groups, most of the groups I've been presenting to, most of them share my opinions, because I have been contacting mostly like peace alliances, kind of human rights advocacy groups. Most of the people that are in favor of human rights, of preserving human rights, are in favor of abolishing the death penalty. I've had some friends who kind of don't agree with what I've been doing. Shouldn't say acquaintances, who kind of really disagree. And so it has been challenging talking to them about it. I think that it's a matter of kind of like, I've tried to have more conversations about it, respectful conversations, trying to hear their side. But it's usually if you have the more conversations you have with them and the more educated they get, the more willing they are to kind of see the pitfall behind capital punishment. I hope that answers your question. Sorry, I kind of went off.
No, I think you addressed the question. Okay, so let me give you another question then. Let's see here. Okay, here, Patricia is asking, my question is, if most people are against the death penalty, who is for it?
I mean, I haven't heard of most people being for the death penalty, just from the research that I have been doing. But if that is the case, I do think that the younger generation is bringing a new sense of social change as we kind of grow up and just learn about the truth behind so many of our American systems. So I do think a lot of it comes from the younger generation. But then again, it is the people that are more left-leaning are for abolishing the death penalty. And the people that are really moving towards social change of any kind are in favor of abolishing the death penalty. Really, anyone who's intact with preserving human rights is in favor of abolishing the death penalty. I think that's where the majority of it comes from.
Well, I think her question was, who is for the death penalty?
Who's for it? Oh, I'm so sorry. I think a lot of the older legislators, a lot of the people, don't know how to phrase this. The people generally who hold more regressive ideologies with politics, a lot of our older legislators, a lot of people that have a lot of the power in our nation that kind of want to preserve that power. They don't really want the nation to change. Those are the people that are for it. It's hard to say because it is such a controversial issue that really anyone could be for or against it, and it can be really hard to know.
Okay, great. I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions. So here's another one. Some death penalty proponents see death penalty and a deterrent to committing capital crime. Okay, so I guess Marion is saying some death penalty proponents see the death penalty as a deterrent to committing capital crime. Yet I don't think there's data to support this. Do you know anything about that, Fiona?
Yeah, I mean, really, if you research it on any site that's non-biased, you'll see that the death penalty is statistically not proven to deter crime. It's really irrefutable. Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's take, I think, one more question here. Robin is asking, is the death penalty counterproductive, leading many to believe that killing someone is justified if they did something bad enough?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish I knew a little bit more about it. I think it's something that, as we see this new presidential administration kind of take place, we'll see a lot more of. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. Wait, I'm sorry, Mark. Could you read that question again? I just want to figure out how to phrase this.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I kind of lost it in the chat here. It's. I'm trying to figure out how this is worded, but I guess the question is the death penalty counterproductive? Does it cause people to think that killing someone is just giving someone the death penalty is justified if they did something bad enough?
I think it definitely, in part, I think that statement is very true. I think that's the case for a lot of kind of rulings that are in place right now, because the death penalty is not something that has had a ton of awareness. I think the fact that it's been in place for so long and that not as much change is happening with it, a lot of people might believe that there's no problem with it. I think that's definitely valid. Yeah, so what I was saying before, my hope is that President Biden and his administration will start to target this issue a little bit more. And once there is a little bit more awareness raised about it, then hopefully people will start to see that there is an issue.
Well, someone was asking, as a follow-up to what you just said, someone was asking, and then we'll take the last question from Marilyn, but someone was asking, what is President Biden's position on the death penalty?
Yeah, so he hasn't spoken too much about it. From what we can tell, he's kind of against it for the most part, but because he is not extremely left-leaning, it's really hard to say because he really just hasn't spoken on it too much. I would generally say that I think that he is against it, but not as against it that he's willing to prioritize it at this moment.
Okay, sure. All right, so for the last question of the evening, let's pass the floor to Marilyn. Marilyn, can you unmute, please?
Somebody helping me out there. Thank you.
Yep.
I applaud you, young lady, Fiona, for your efforts and for the work you've done and for the work you're doing. I would hope that other young people would come and join you because I do think it is the younger generation that's going to make great impact in changing most of the social justices in this country. I think each generation has their space, and it's since we've been engaged in trying to do better as far as human rights. My question to you, or maybe it's a statement, is do you think that because of the racial disparity that there has not been a lot of attention given to abolishing the death penalty because it's largely a Black or Black and people of color issue, because they are, or we are, the majority of people that are affected by death penalty.
Yeah, I think that definitely is true in for the most part, especially with the last president that we had in his administration. That was an administration that really did not want to highlight racial injustice issues in the least. And because of that, capital punishment really wasn't in the political conversation, in the news really at all. We saw like a couple days before someone's execution, we would see, oh, sign these petitions, and that's pretty much it. There was no real talk about where this capital punishment disparity stems from. There was no real talk about kind of the systemic discriminations that lie within it. I think it's another thing that once we see the Biden administration, once they have more time to kind of really let everyone know where they stand with the issue, then we'll see everything will be a little bit more clear. It'll be easier to say. But
Has it been placed before them?
Sorry?
Has the issue been placed before the Biden administration? Or is it something we're just waiting for them to stumble upon? Have they been approached with this issue, and what is their position on it?
The Biden administration, or?
Yes, the Biden administration.
Yeah, I mean, I think people have tried to get them to include it in their conversation, but I think because President Biden is not as left-leaning, and because he does want to make sure that he's able to keep intact with the Republican Party as well. That was a big part of his campaign. I think my thinking is that he does not want to kind of jump right into mentioning such a big change, talking about such a big change, which is why it's so important for the rest of us to continue to keep the issue in our conversation and to keep raising awareness for it on our own.
So how do we affect a largely, I'm just going to say this, a largely Republican Congress, who I believe are systematically the ones that have not moved to eradicate or eliminate this death penalty issue? Seeing how the last administration, as you mentioned, are largely Republican influencers, I would think that would be a large a wall that would have to be approached in order to get movement on abolishment.
Yeah, and that's another thing where I wish I knew more. I don't think any of us really know the full answer to that question, but that's why I'm doing this presentation. I think the first part of the solution to that is just continuing to raise awareness and hold these administrations accountable. It is difficult because it seems as though these people who are in Congress who just don't seem to go away, it's hard.
Not yet.
We're working on it.
Yeah, we are.
Right. But yeah, that's the thing. I mean, we have seen some progress. There's been some change in Congress and who has the power in our nation. And in large part, that comes from making sure everyone is aware and educated, making sure everyone has equal voting rights, making sure everyone is keeping these political conversations active. I think that's the best that I can tell you now. I'm hoping that as I continue to work with this, I'll become a little bit more aware of some of the bigger things that we can do also.
I tell you, you are doing an extraordinary job. Your humbleness is giving you strength and power. You're not coming at it, you're coming at it very aggressively, but you're not coming at it arrogantly. You realize there are a lot of things you need to know and you're willing to go for it. So I applaud you. I applaud everything that you're doing. And I do hope that people come alongside you. And I do hope people independently and collectively will begin to work on this. I am a member of a large group of people that are working on prison reform. So that is my interest in being here on this evening. Just continue doing what you're doing.
Thank
You're
you so
doing a
much.
great job.
I really appreciate it. And thank you for your questions too. I definitely made me rethink a lot of my statements too.
A lot of what you said leans to the idea or the fact that this is based largely on, I'm going to tell you something you might want to take with you forward, going forward, is at this point, a lot of the things we are doing to change or to do human rights reform is to change the narrative, to change the language. Just like they talk about the new voter suppression, there are 361 voter suppression bills that are being enacted in Georgia and other parts, is spreading to other parts of the country. And it occurred to me that these are not voter suppression bills, these are voter discrimination bills. So we have to look at things and call them what they actually are. And then people can deal with what they are. Voter discrimination is a lot different than voter suppression. So in order to combat that, we have to do it on the playing field that it's placed on. So when you hear a thing, make sure you embrace it into what it is that your involvement is in having to change it. We can't change a thing unless we know exactly what we're working towards. So I'll just send you with that. And the fact that you have new things to think about, I'm hoping that'll give you a little more direction and focus in what it is you're actually going for and what it is you're actually doing. But
Yeah.
that takes nothing from what you're doing. I applaud you, as I said several times. I'm proud of you.
Thank you so much. That means so much.
Awesome. Well, on that positive note, I think let's get ready to wrap up tonight's program. We do share the sentiment that Marilyn was just articulating, encouraging you, Fiona, to stay on your journey, and thanking you for taking an interest in this issue and then sharing it with us. When I was your age at 16 years old, there were lots of political issues I cared deeply about, but I never spoke publicly about them. I never worked on them in the way you're doing. So I think that's really awesome. So again, what we'll do is this discussion tonight was recorded. We'll post the video up. I'll give Fiona the email addresses of everyone who registered for this event. So in the next day or two, well, she is in school. So when Fiona has time in the next couple of days, she'll email you out a copy of the video. She'll email you out the name of the bill Ayanna Pressley is championing to end the death penalty. Cole shared it in the chat. I'll just plug it in again real quickly. It's HR 262, the Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act. It has 73 co-sponsors, which is really encouraging. That's the House version, and then there's a Senate version as well. That's Bill S582. So we'll be sharing these bill numbers out with everyone via email. We'll share the video of this event. Fiona, you can also share the interview you were showing us with Charles Keith, so people can take a look at that if they want. And on that note, Fiona, do you have any closing remarks you want to leave us with?
I just really want to thank everyone for your attention and for your time. Being someone from the younger generation, sometimes it can feel like people just don't really want to listen to us. So this means so much. I'm so grateful for your time and for your attention. So just really thank you is all I have to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming and
Thank you.
speaking to us and for advocating about this issue. So keep at it. And everyone else, thank you so much for your time tonight and for your questions and your discussions and for joining us. So thank you so much. And everyone, please have a great night.
Thank you, Fiona. Great job.
Thanks.